All right, let's go ahead and kick things off. We can see more and more viewers coming in. My name is Sarah Bodine. I'm part of the ZEDEDA team, and I'm very happy to welcome all of you to the State of the Stack session. And it is my pleasure to turn things over to Compass Intelligence's CEO and founder, Stephanie Atkinson, to moderate the panel today. Take it away, Stephanie.
Thank you, Sarah. So I want to welcome everyone for joining us today. We'll go through some introductions at first while people are starting to join us. I can see the numbers going up. So thanks everyone for joining us today. This is the first session with our esteemed panelists today. So first, just a little bit about myself. My name's Stephanie Atkinson and I run Compass Intelligence. We're a 15-plus-year-old market research and intelligence agency and do a lot of work in this space around mobile IoT and emerging technologies. So thank you for listening today. So I'm going to be moderating the session. We have our 5 attendees here, our speakers today, and we're here today to dive deeper into the state of the stack. And I know there's been quite a bit of discussion already this morning if you've been attending. And more specifically, we're going to dive into edge and kind of the impact to IoT and some of the changing dynamics that we see across the architecture side and some of the experiences that we have from our panelists here. So edge computing, I know, combined with IoT brings a whole level of simplification and new possibilities for immediate and real-time decision-making for things like fleet management, asset tracking, supply chain management, advanced manufacturing, building management. There's a long list of core industry applications that we see filtering in to this particular space. So what is the significance of the edge in the IoT stack, right? Especially compared to cloud. And we have folks that have a vast amount of experience across the stack. And what's that impact? The orchestration, the management, what are those core benefits? And really, most importantly, what are the best practices? Because most of these guys on the panel here have a lot of experience that they can share today. And we're going to gather a lot more we're going to dig into their brains a lot more today. So we have 4 gentlemen joining us today. Aaron from Clearblade, Paul from Cognizant, and Blake, formerly with Wellaware, and we'll learn more about his expertise and where he's going. And then Jason with Edge Micro. And I want to have you first introduce yourself and maybe talk about where you play in the stack, because I think that's really it's going to be important for us to kind of lay that foundation. I hate to use the word foundation, but let me know where you play in the stack and kind of where, maybe a little bit of background about your expertise. Maybe we'll start with Paul.
All right, I'm Paul Henderson. I'm with Cognizant, and I'm the global head of the IoT strategy and advisory practice within the Connected Digital Business unit within Cognizant, which is one of the largest technology and service providers in the world. And just a little bit about my background. For those on the phone, we were talking earlier about the early days, and I came from Wind River, that systems doing embedded stuff, and then kind of went up the stack with Intel and other companies. I ended up at Schneider Electric as the VP of Device Intelligence and Edge, where I sort of worked on this taxonomy and then all the use cases within that. And now within Schneider, although the topic is not specifically Edge, but I deal with almost all IoT implementations involve some type of an edge discussion of some kind. And it really gets down to the attributes that we're going to talk about today and the stack, and trying to, in all these different use cases, to help and advise our customers to what tool fits the right job and how to make it work. So we've got a great set of panelists here that know more than I do about this. So that's me, and it's a topic near and dear to my heart. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that intro. And Jason, you're next.
Hi, everybody. Jason Bork, VP of Revenue and Strategy for Edge Micro. We kind of set that foundational layer of the stack, provide edge colocation services in Tier 2 and Tier 3 markets. So we see all use cases: software, hardware, IoT, analytics, gaming, cloud, etc. So excited to participate on the panel. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Now, Blake.
Yeah. Hi, Blake Carlson. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Actually, just left an IoT startup, but we're running a consulting business. I do mostly digital transformation work for private equity and venture capital firms that are looking at really spanning the IT/OT divide. But my career has been spent in startups and mostly business modeling. So I had the pleasure of going through some, unicorn IPOs in the early 2000s, late 90s, and have really enjoyed, this IT/OT convergence. I was an executive in Emerson Electric, sold them a business, and I'm really fascinated with this movement from all of the commoditization and convergence we've seen in data centers to this move to distributed systems, distributed architectures, and really how do we package that up with a bow under a profitable business model that really makes sense. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Stephanie, and look forward to this chat.
Thank you. Next up, we have Aaron.
Hi, Aaron Allsbrook, CTO and co-founder here at Clearblade. Thank you for having me today. This is going to be fun. Like it's been mentioned, the stack has a bunch of layers to it. And where is Clearblade? Clearblade is kind of more at the top on the application side. So when we get down, how do we put all these pieces together to do something like asset tracking, to do something like asset monitoring? Clearblade helps sit on that actual application point. My background has been in application and application development for I guess forever. But way back when we were building apps in the IBM world on the J2E side, and then working in the dev tool space there, working in the practitioner space of building these apps. And then today with the software we have that allows us to build edge-based apps that very rapidly solve problems and help us put all these pieces together.
Well, great. Well, thanks for the intros, guys. So I want to start us off, and I want to set the stage for our discussion today. And even heard on some of the previous discussions around their core definitions and how they really define the edge. And for you guys that are operating across different parts of the stack, maybe talk about your perspective there. But I want to hear first is, how do you define the edge? Edge of network, endpoint device, assets. Is it at the building? Where is this edge? Tell me a little bit more about that. Maybe we'll start with Aaron.
Sure. So you're right. The word edge was specific, and now it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So now we're down to, if it's not in the cloud and not in a big data center or enterprise data center, it's now the edge is kind of how we view it. That means we have a space that we can run from all the way from little tiny devices, that's an edge, a node, so to speak, all the way up to very large, powerful, almost hyperscale like regional data centers. That's still part of the edge. So we see a gamut of kind of compute capability and things are areas. We see 4 categories, right? You've got the physical layer, you have a network layer, you have a management layer, and then you kind of have the app layer, and probably need security across all of them. But that's how we view the edge. Is it's not in the cloud and it's not in your enterprise data center.
Great, thank you. And Blake, what's your perspective? Yeah,
I agree with Aaron's comment. I think the only thing I'd add is that the real drill down needs to happen then at that 4th layer of the application. And it's either a batch process or it's a real-time app load, and that's why we have to go distributed. So the hyperscalers taught us a bunch in the last decade around, building and optimizing infrastructure for a specific application workload. And so now we're going to start doing that at the edge. And luckily with, Moore's law and the, dropping cost of, of servers and network technology, we can't move electrons faster than the speed of light. So we've got we've got a networking problem. So we have to go to the edge, and it's really going to, I think it'll turn into, application mapping, tied to, how do we, deliver this as cost effectively as possible and take advantage of Moore's law and all the fun stuff.
And Jason, I'd love to hear your perspective, especially you mentioned to me specifically that you're working at the foundational level. What's the impact of this edge networking trend to your industry and some of the areas that you're playing in?
Yeah, so thanks, Aaron, for tapping into the OSI layer model there a little bit. I wasn't there, but yeah, I agree with kind of where Aaron said in Blake as well about where the edge is. Where we're focused is, outside of those core main internet trains in the 7 to 9 major internet train cities. So closer to the subscriber networks, the eyeball networks, which we're all taking advantage of now since we're all working from home. The areas where I won't say they're forgotten about, but 1.5 million to 750,000 subscribers that are in high demand for low latency applications to run their fleet. So where the fiber intersects operate, or the MSO and cable network operators have head ends, those are kind of where we're strategically placing our environments for our customers to operate their platforms. And our customers are those hyperscalers, the CDNs, the gaming companies, IoT analytics, those folks. So we don't really see, from an enterprise perspective, the use cases. What we're seeing is the service provider use cases for the subscribers. So it's a little unique. Paul and I talked about it a little bit earlier too. Paul sees kind of the whole gamut of everything, since he's a little more start to finish. And Blake and Aaron and I talked about it as well. But we see all use cases. So from the space and power all the way up to the infrastructure and software stacks, all the way up the line. So.
No, thank you, Jason. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Did you have something else to add?
Just saying, we have a unique view into it all.
So, Paul, I see that you joined us. So there was an intermittent slip out. You're slipping out, you're slipped back in. So we were just really kind of setting the foundation around our definitions of the edge and where you believe that. What's your definition? What are some of the things that
so I'll kind of say, when Eric Schmidt said, in the future there'll be no internet, and everyone went, what are you talking about? It's Google and all that. He said, well, it is becoming a fundamental ingredient. And so the novelty of its edge is not edge versus thinking of it as a distributed compute network and as an ingredient is kind of the journey we're on right now. And so, we've had sort of on-prem processing, and we've had that kind of, sensor, signal conditioning around forever. But what this really represents is an open canvas in which you can create the right compute environment for the right job. And whether that be trying to massively distribute data out, or you're doing local processing and AI video analytics in a building, this is a fundamental ingredient and an ecosystem that's forming that allows you to sort of curate the right processing and the right data at the right level. And there are some, as I can't remember who was talking about the physical constraints of the environment. You've got, things like cost and physics and other things that really will help, define what that is. What you do on an oil rig is different than what you'll do in an office building, for example. So I think as we look at this, it's really those ingredients that are coming together. And the state of the stack really is that we have a good start. And I think open initiatives that kind of bring all that together to as much of a uniform set of ingredients as possible is going to be what is successful. And then we'll see these design patterns step and repeat around the ecosystem. So it's an exciting time. We were taking a trip back in the Wayback Machine. I think all of us have been around. And I think it's been really fun to see this finally happen where, we're seeing the evolution of the edge happening, and it is unlocking a lot of use cases that previously were not, economically or technically possible.
Well, you mentioned open, and I've heard the word quite a bit this morning. I know Jason this morning was talking about LF Edge and some of the things that are happening with the Linux Foundation. What's the importance of open? I know when enterprise and cities hear of open, they kind of cringe because of the security implications of open. Maybe share your perspective of how important this open architecture is for edge. Who wants to jump in on that one?
I'll go first again. I'm happy to do it.
Okay.
So openness is, I think it's an enabling technology, so to speak, for edge, right? I mean, it is definitely a place where there's a lot of vendors having to work together. So everywhere that we have some open technologies to build on, it's easier for us to work together. I'll let others talk about specific areas. I'll talk about what I see as openness at that application layer that's so important. I really have three. One is we have to be able to talk to each other, between each other. And so that's open standards for communication, that's APIs, that's using protocols. I don't need one winner protocol. I'm happy having 40, but I need it to be a standard that we know and can expect between each other. I think that's a core piece of an openness in applications. I think the data that's generated, letting that data be open at least to the customer, I think that's an important success point to this. Again, the data will still be protected and private and all that sort of stuff, but not locking it out from the customer is a key element. And then the last is really the actual the behavior, right? So we really believe that when you build this application, that definition of the application belongs to you. So that openness, the same way we put our code into source code repositories, that kind of stuff, there's always a tendency in early technologies to lock it in. I think if we're going to be successful, we need to be able to have these pieces of application that are basically being able to export it and moved around. I think that's the right path, and that's built on other, open languages and such as well. So those are the three I see at the application level. I'll let others talk about other importance in open and other categories.
I don't expect all of you to chime in for each question because we've got some great content to cover. But if anybody wants to add one more thing, and then I'll jump into a new question.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say about open is and I love that you deconstructed the word, because you've got open APIs, you've got open data, open, and then there's open source, which is a different thing. And then there's open ecosystems. So I think when we use the word open, and I do think it's a key ingredient. And in the end of the day, you're curating, you want to create the best of the best class. And I think, Aaron, you were good about saying, look, doesn't have to be necessarily a winning protocol. It just has to be something we can all use. And that is somewhat of an organic process. And it involves the ability for these open standards to interact. And that's something that changes with time. And, open really means the freedom is the ability to leave or to change. And I think that what doesn't work is where you see these, and we see less of this now, these highly vertically integrated things where it's like you buy our hardware, you use our proprietary operating system with our proprietary language that's talking to our proprietary servers. Those days, thankfully, are largely behind us, because we have the ability to really create the best of breeds in a solution as we look at our solutions architecture across. And as a person that is helping customers do that, I really appreciate the ability to leverage the best of the ecosystem. And to me, open really represents the ecosystem and the power of that ecosystem.
So I want to move on, because we have great topics here that we had already kind of filtered through. How maybe talk a little bit more about how the edge and mobility fit together. I think a lot of folks are hearing, 5G, the impact of 5G. You even have LPWAN, you have satellite, you have all these different connectivity issues that are coming into play. And now even CBRS, right? They're selling directly to the enterprise. They're selling through the service provider channels. Maybe talk a little bit more about how these things are coming together, and what you're seeing from your customers in terms of them understanding all of these different competing connectivity options along with their edge kind of solution. Jason, do you have anything you would like to add around that topic?
And we see that, right, from the network layer a lot. And we're seeing it with Verizon and Amazon, Microsoft and AT&T, partnering up. The MNOs are kind of figuring out, hey, let's just develop on a third-party stack and kind of roll our own offering. You can see Amazon Wavelength and all the things that they're doing. And we're in line right there with that. Our view on 5G and what we are hoping to provide the market is it kind of goes along with open, to get out of the walled garden approach. So allow the subscriber to have access to whatever networks they want to have access to. So in a given metro, if we were able to strategically place a micro data center and have all the major MNOs and wireless providers access that network, and then the various cloud providers are in our ecosystem, then the end user subscriber can log on and utilize any subscriber network they want. It's not a Amazon and Verizon or a AT&T and Microsoft. It is any spectrum, any platform, and any compute layer. That's kind of goes along with open. Right? I mean, it gives the end user subscriber the ability to pick and choose what they want. And I think that's where we're headed, especially with the, everybody at home, right? I mean, everybody kind of delivering over whatever frequency we can. We all have connectivity issues, right? I mean, whether that's broadband, whether that's TSL, whether that's wireless or satellite. So it's enabling the end user to get out of a walled garden type approach and give them the access to subscribe to the network they want to subscribe to.
Now that's great perspective. Now I want to jump into the industries, because I think there are a lot of industries that are kind of early adopters. They're quick movers. They're doing things in a little bit more aggressive fashion around different IoT solutions, IoT applications, especially on the industrial and manufacturing side. Can you guys share some of your perspectives around some of the key early adopting industries and maybe some specific use cases that you might want to share around what you're experiencing with your work and with your companies?
Yeah, I'll take that. One of the things that I found so exciting about IoT is, you can put a low-cost piece of compute somewhere, have low-cost communication, availability and choice for those comms, and then connect to the cloud and then build this wonderful database and do anything you want with the data. And we've seen, asset tracking, right, has been a nice kind of gateway drug, if you will, to IoT. And I think what's been most interesting for me is watching how asset tracking turned into a systems approach of fleet management, right? Let's not just take data from an actual asset where we've got an RFID tag and maybe GPS connectivity, but let's integrate that data set with the labor utilization of the teamster who's driving the truck and is responsible for this load, and then put it together as a system and deliver that in an enterprise value stack. And that market is absolutely taken off. And so I think fleet management's been a wonderful example of how a systemic approach of not only putting the tech, the comms, the cloud, but also the SME workflow, and then a nice business model around it, has delivered tremendous value. Now, we are still early on in this evolution, but that's a pretty good example of how powerful IoT can be in a 2020 timeframe.
I know with edge analytics and really providing that real-time information, that real-time intelligence, there are some specific earlier applications that we're seeing kind of give rise, right? I know there's been a lot of buzz around, and this is really early, is the autonomous vehicle side. But also, you already mentioned fleet and asset tracking, fleet monitoring. Are there some other industries or other earlier applications where edge is becoming much more vital to operations or information sharing or logistics or supply chain? Love to hear your perspective. Aaron?
Yeah, I'll take one, and I don't think this industry would call themselves a leading industry or by any stretch, right? As a matter of fact, most of the folks I talk to don't know the words IoT or edge, but they do understand their problem, right? An operational problem that I do find them pushing far ahead, and that's rail. Essentially, if you think about what they've had a lot of embedded processing for years. They've got a lot of remote locations. They have a lot of big, heavy pieces of machinery moving around in the public and around their employees. And so they, for all intents and purposes, are really pushing the way forward for a lot of this edge compute. There's use cases like the connected locomotive, right? Do we send all the data for every locomotive and every piece of equipment back to the cloud? Of course not, right? What are we going to do? We need to do local processing on that locomotive. If we have, neighborhood data centers as the locomotive goes by, we throw off analytics to that. These things, because it's moving, creates a really compelling edge use case. I know there's the connected rail crossing. Crossings generate unbelievable amounts of data just for two arms to go up and two bells to blink and a couple lights to blink and a couple bells to ding, right? I mean, there's so much log, history kept about, did it work properly? Was it within the 7 to 11.5 seconds that it was supposed to go up and down? Did anyone drive through it? What was the accelerometer? Did the gate get hit? This stuff piles up, and you look at it and I don't want to put all that back over whatever my backhaul technology might be, whether it was 3G fiber or 2G. So the edge computing use cases have really bubbled up. The switch is another great example, right? This thing literally just goes left and right, but holy cow, does it create a lot of data and tell you when it's going to break, and the consequences are huge. So we've seen and have production in that space, and I think it fits actually to Blake to tie back. That actually is really going back to this transportation, the asset tracking, the movement, the logistics. That is really a space that's been able to grab edge quickly. They've been able to grab some simple edge type compute, some simple edge type protocols, some simple sensors, and find a way to use them quickly. So that's an industry. I think the rail is very analogous to the shipping and the ports. We see that. It's very analogous to the airport. It's very analogous to trucking, quite frankly. So I think that's a space that's grabbed really quickly.
There's there's some really great common things that you mentioned there, Aaron, and it's industries or assets or very high value assets that are moving critical information or critical data for safety and security, and vast amounts of maybe real highly important information. So that volume, so I think that there's probably some common themes that we'll start to capture around some of the earlier adopters. I know, Paul, you had a couple of comments.
Yeah, I was just reacting to my good friend Bill Osepch's question. I think we all get caught up on the high press items, but these boring areas are actually more valuable than things beyond fleet management and rail. So first of all, I want to amplify those because fleet management is one. Once you have a footprint in the vehicle, you look at what Tesla's done, it's obvious, but we're seeing in the commercial side that as we interact with our customers, that looking at driver behavior, using predictive edge analytics to figure out, if the person's, smoking or drinking and on their cell phone, that they should be flagged in real time and, stop their truck. These are all things that are happening today. And they all tie back into the asset and the asset tracking. I also agree with rail as well. I was going to kind of and with rail. It's not just it's everything. It's property management. And again, I think it ties back to the whole ecosystem. And I think what the pattern there is, another one is power distribution and oil and energy, which is something that has gotten a lot of press. You always see like the IoT windmill going, and there's so many moving parts of the windmill, and it gets the high press. But there's a whole bunch of infrastructural side that move really slow. You look at sewage treatment or sanitation. You look at water distribution, water systems, connected water. Multi-tenant dwelling. There's a lot of sort of silent, less than exciting things that go on, but they are activities that go on in scale. Another one that's interesting is just looking at how you manage smart and intelligent spaces. I think we'll probably get a question about COVID here, but how can you ensure that within an enterprise that you're maintaining social distancing, people are washing their hands? I mean, this is like the ideal IoT application where you can combine mobility, final location services, analytics, and back-end systems, tie them together to ensure a safe working environment or in a factory for compliance and other things. So, I mean, the sky's the limit. I think the boring ones, what I'll say is that in our business, we see a tremendous set of activity with respect to COVID with accelerating digital transformation, where they're saying, can I do that without a person there? Whether it be a restaurant or it be a trading floor or whether it be telehealth, we're seeing this tremendous kind of sea change in how do we automate this, and edge is again seen as an ingredient. The one that surprised me were these slow moving industries. The last industry I thought would ever shift and disrupt would be something like rail. I mean, it's so highly regulated that you say they're never going to change, and then all of a sudden they're in front of everybody else. It's a strange leapfrog.
Well,
you actually bring up a good. I actually think regulation is a big edge driver. I mean, in all honesty, we look for industries that have regulation because they are ones that are needing these reports and they're taking a lot of time.
Yeah, there's a comment from Bill. He said, these are examples of telco edge, on-premise edge, leverage broad data. Will the same continuity of compute ever happen to the far edge?
I personally believe that it will. So my hypothesis is that the compute power will end up closer and closer to the sensor. Here's a perfect example right here. That what will happen is that there's a lot of stuff that can happen in a distributed computing mesh. And the more you can kind of create that intelligent, almost like neural net of capability, the better off you are, because that way it's going to be more reliable, more efficient, and easier to deal with. So I personally believe that far edge, near edge will blur, and that things are going to get pushed further to the edge in terms of where the processing happens, and there's going to be more uniformity in the compute continuum. That's my theory. Anybody else have any other thoughts?
I'll be the counter because it's always fun to have someone argue.
Excellent.
So yes, probably. But what's interesting is every time I thought it was going to get more powerful, somebody come and made something smaller than I ever imagined, right? And so So yes, I imagine that, we will have incredible supercomputers sitting at very remote locations, but somebody will come off with a 1 nano sensor. And yet again, I'm stuck trying to figure out how to, so I think we will get a lot more homogenous in that sense, but I think we'll continue to have new best of breed things that we're all scratching our chin about. Now, how do we bring this into the ecosystem next?
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, your phone's a perfect example of good grief, right? That's what a great edge device.
Yeah,
The only thing-
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add one little point. I do think there's a line of demarcation between one-way data flow of monitoring versus two-way data flow of controls. And when you start bringing machines into the situation, and compliance purposes, service level agreements, that controls layer is going to be really, really interesting. But I totally agree with your point, Aaron, that's going to take some time. And so I use that $35 Raspberry Pi running full-fledged Linux as an example. When that gets down to sub $1, can it? When does then the controls layer of demarcation become ubiquitous and reliable? And so that's where I think things get really interesting, and that's coming. We know it's coming. We just don't know when.
Bill clarified and said
you mentioned.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I said, Paul, you mentioned COVID. So we're hearing kind of mixed reviews, but I think on the positive side, we're hearing some big drivers because of the coronavirus and because of COVID. We're talking mitigation, safety, cameras for physical distancing and helping kind of control environments. I'd love to hear your perspective, especially all of you guys have different projects that you're working on. Are you seeing kind of a slowdown or an amplification of the need for some of these IoT solutions? We're seeing a lot of IoT amplification. We need to do this quicker, faster. We're signing on. We're doing things a little bit faster because of COVID. What's your perspective, or what are you experiencing?
I think I'll jump in here because cognizant this whole process of and we're in the business of being a technology provider to Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies. And when this COVID thing hit, it was freaky is the only word I'll use. It was bizarre. You had certain industries like the airline industry wholesale completely canceling all of their digital transformation, retail, hospitality, like a nuclear winter. And we were sitting there going, oh my gosh, we're going to have 100,000 people sitting on nothing to do. At the same time, our phone is ringing off the hook that somebody says, we need to automate and create a distributed stock exchange. We need to be able to continue to offer telemedicine, and we need a telemedicine solution. We need. So we actually saw this, it's like a hockey game where all the players come and go, and there's only a couple left on there. I sort of this big swap of people doing kind of what I call brownfield, kind of regular, we're just going to kind of business as usual, and a real shift. So what we see is there's sort of three categories. One is the people who are doing it because their business depends on it. And if they don't, they die. It's an existential question of, I can't be in business if everyone in my meat packing plant gets COVID, or, I can't get my folks in to take care of that. Then you also see a class of customers who see this as a business opportunity, and they're often maybe a second or third tier person in an industry, and they've had the big dog that's been at the top that suddenly was kind of complacent, and they see this as the massive acceleration of digital transformation is their way to just kill the market. And we're seeing that happening at scale in almost every industry. So it's been a really interesting, I think it's a massive accelerator, and IoT in particular. I think people are willing to think of something that looked too hard or that was impossible and put it on the table for discussion, which is really exciting.
So remote operations possibly being a big driver, and just the fear of not having that human manual man resources there at these different facilities to do the work. We need to start having visual context. We need to start having ways to automate different procedures and operations that maybe we just didn't think of in the past. Anyone else want to add to that? And we'll jump into best practices, because I see we're up against time, and then we'll see if we have some questions from our attendees.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I just quickly, obviously COVID has catapulted the need for more distributed systems. having capacity at these large cities is, available, but the need for more distributed systems, the need for a more managed, outsourced environmental, data center is absolutely key. You mentioned it, Stephanie. Being able to, let's say outsource, but have an extension of your IT staff that's available, either whether that's through tools, automation, or physical people is extremely important. So, our client base is growing at, double and triple digits, which is great. But, the need for distributed platforms has never been more necessary.
Yeah, I'd say big drivers. It's digital, mobile, virtual, and automate. I mean, those things are just running across. And so I want to jump into best practices, because all of you guys have different perspectives and different experiences, specifically to the stack, right? What are some key recommendations that you might want to give to our audience, especially as some of those that are maybe they're getting started, or maybe they're a little bit more educated than the average, customer coming in, but they want to hear from you. You've got some great experiences, wins, losses, what's not working, maybe an example of something that you went through that crashed and burned, a lesson learned. Paul, you're smiling. I see you.
I'll pick up.
Aaron,
go ahead,
Aaron.
Aaron.
I'll follow up, Aaron. I'll go number two.
All right. I'll take two, right? So I'll take two recommendations. So for best practice, the first is you really need to understand your requirements, and a crash and burn or a lesson learned story is, we had a mine wanted to do some safety monitoring as things moved through the mine that were large and heavy. We picked some technology that was very cost efficient, used LP-WAN. It all worked great, except it didn't work quite fast enough once the driver was there trying to understand if the situation was going to work, right? LP-WAN was not the right speed for what they needed, right? So in every sense, the technologists got it right. In every sense, we couldn't use the situation. So you really do have to understand the end value, the end ROI, and the end use case. So I lead with that because what I find a lot of enterprises, and that's mostly what Clearblade works with, or large enterprises, is they have everyone making decisions independently. So ultimately, you end up with the group that gets to pick the cloud. You end up with the group that gets to pick how they're going to build the application. You end up with some people who get to pick hardware. You get some data center, and they've never talked to each other, right? And then you have the poor guy at the end who might make the sensor or pick the sensor. And so then you have this really weird arranged marriage. And vendors today are getting good at that, but it's this arranged force of partners. I think it would behoove enterprises to first get together and at least figure out who's making these decisions up front. Because even then, they become compounding factors as you come and work together. So I think you need to I recognize enterprises make these decisions with different specialties. You need to bring those people together. That looks a lot like, ITOT, all that kind of stuff that we've heard about, but it's still true today.
Yeah.
No, great example. Paul, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just violently agree. I wish I could say I could argue with you, Aaron, but you're spot on. So just a couple of things. So one is mind the gap, the ITOT gap. We always talk about that, but that still is the cross-functional linkage is where things are breaking today. The other thing I'll say is that a best practice is to really be clear about not just the use case, but also the actual business value and how you measure it, as well as the experience. So this should be considered a closed loop optimization as kind of a lean startup. And it's not just about solutions and technology. So often the technologists get involved and they're forgetting about the business and the experience, and then they get astray, and then the project gets canceled. And I don't know how many kind of POC hells that I've been in. The other thing is to not underestimate the impact on your organization's ability to actually support these transformational changes. That as you go through that, we all know how to do it, but you go into organizations that might have a waterfall process, and the word DevOps is something I've never heard. And they fail because they don't have the people and the process down for how they can actually manage it. So we have to teach them how to manage this virtualized environment with Edge, and that's part of the set of ingredients. But I really agree with everything, Aaron, you said.
Great, Jason. Did you have something you wanted to share?
Sure. Yeah, for us, we've kept it simple. Data center co-location has been around for years. So we're not reinventing the wheel. We're making it a repeatable process that we've all experienced through our operations teams that's managed large multi-megawatt data centers. We bring the best process procedures down to the micro data center level, so that the end user has the same type of experience they have with some of the larger players. So it's just simple enablement and a repeatable process. That's really our best practices.
And Blake, you've with Well Aware, I know you had quite a bit of experience and activity there. I'd love to get your perspective on any best practices.
I think I was new to IoT in 2017, so I'm 3.5 years in, and the biggest surprise for me was that I found most customers and even vendors are trying to systems integrate everything themselves, and that's just been a disaster in terms of failed projects. And I think there's kind of two sides to that coin. One is what IP do you really want to gather as a company? Right, both technically and even in business process. That's the first question you've got to answer. And then the second is, after you do answer those questions, right, what's a P&L structure for your business? So when we talk about this session of best practices in IoT edge architecture, don't forget about the business architecture and the SME architecture. And I think what's going to happen, this is just my prognosticated hat, is we're going to start outsourcing this more. We're going to start to see the layers of vendor approaches that, hey, I'm an expert at this piece. Let me handle that. I'm good at it. And you're going to start to see a lot more aggregation from the vendor ecosystem under an open model. I think that's going to happen. But it hasn't really happened yet. I'm starting to see some change in the second half of 2019. But there's still this fear that I have to own my infrastructure. And then the second statement they make is because then I own the data. And that's a whole nother topic around what do you do with the data? How do you monetize it? Is it important? Is there IP there? And that's going to be another fun experiment for the next 5 to 10 years.
So a really common theme across all of your feedback here is understanding the business, maybe taking a step back and not focusing so heavily on the technology, but understanding that business, that industry, their ecosystem before you get into the technology ecosystem, and then business value. Everyone talks about use cases, but business value is really the big driver here is from a best practices perspective. If you don't get that right, then you're going to fail every time. All right, Sarah, are we at time now?
We are. We're actually a few minutes over. So I'd like to thank all of you. This was a great discussion. And to the attendees that are watching right now, if you go over to the sessions tab, you'll see the next set of 4 sessions that are going to start in 60 seconds. So head on over there.
Thank you, Sarah.
All of you for your time today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Stephanie.